looking lovely. So I'm, Kira Daly. I have been, designer for probably over 12 years now. Started off doing graphic design and then I moved randomly into marketing. So I've been a marketing professional for about 8 of those years. I currently work for Transpire. So Transpire is a digital consultancy that creates digital experiences that transform and inspire, not expire. And so we specialise in mobile app development largely. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about the reality when building accessible mobile apps, the do's and the don'ts from the lessons that I've learnt and my teams have learnt. And I'll share some resources that might be useful for you and your teams. And I'm really randomly nervous, so just bear with me because I'm feeling a bit feral. So the reality. So the reality when it comes to people making digital products is that accessibility can quickly fall to the wayside when things like scope, time and budget come into play, and they're often competing. So at Transpire a few years ago, we said that accessibility was no longer going to be a line item. It wasn't going to be something that we spoke about. It was a silent non-negotiable. So it was just something that you got when you worked with us. And now we won't proclaim that we're the best accessibility experts in the market. That's what Adam and the team at Utopia are for. That's not the only plug that he'll get tonight, but we do promise that it's our core values, and it's something that we always focus on and we talk about throughout our projects. So basically, just for those of you who may not know, these are project sliders. So a lot of consultancies may present these to the client at the start of a project and say, okay, so you want to build a digital product. When it comes to the levers and the things that you're going to negotiate on during this project, where do these things fall into place? And this is a bit of a, budget, it's the most important thing. Time, we can be a little bit flexible. Scope, no, we want all the features that we want. Accessibility, unfortunately, sometimes gets dragged to the end. So the do's and the don'ts first. So do create a minimum accessible level. So when I talk minimum accessible level, sorry if I'm flying through here, create a baseline accessibility acceptance criteria. So at Transpire, we work in Agile, and this is an example of the accessibility acceptance criteria we provide to all of our stories. So accessibility is the responsibility of the entire delivery team. And so designers will take care of things like touch targets. So we set out the initial design, and so that we know that for Android, touch targets need to be a minimum of 48 square DP, and on iOS it needs to be 44 square. Touch target should be 8 DP from each other, or pixels. They should be labelled so that they are accessible for screen readers, and you should use dynamic fonts. Now, when we talk dynamic fonts, is there anyone in here that has, I would love to check because some people don't even realise they do this, but does anyone have their font increased on their phones in here? Anyone? I bet if we check, half of you would. Because I've spoken to friends and I've been like, Jesus Christ, sorry for swearing, your font is huge on your phone. And they're like, no, it's not, it's standard. And I'm like, no, this is standard. And then I go into their settings and they've got it to the maximum. So I would say with dynamic fonts that with Android, it comes pretty much out of the box because the way that Android works, it talks about DP and everything kind of grows and adapts as it is quite easy for Android developers to be able to do dynamic font sizes. Whereas iOS, it requires a lot more design and thought and planning. And so there are times where, unfortunately, dynamic fonts sizing on iOS apps can be one of the things that gets negotiated out. But have that thought, and if you're committed to it, do it up front. I can see people are tweeting me already. So have complementary text and image grouping. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later, so you'll see what I'm talking about. Make sure that your image has alt text, and make sure you've got good color contrast. So at a minimum, your small text, everyday text should be 4.5 to 1 against its background. And if you've got larger text, so that's 14 points if it's bold or 18 points if it's not, 3 to 1. And so your icons should also follow that 4.5 to 1. And then if you want to check your color contrast, you can run them through things like Funkify. So don't assume, just gonna, don't assume that your baseline acceptance criteria is going to be used. Now, with Transpire, we say it's our commitment, it's something that we always do, but when the client is pushing for things to be delivered and conversations aren't being had all the time, sometimes your baseline acceptance criteria actually falls behind and you don't even realize. So I'm just going to share this video with you. And this gentleman was born blind, so he had very low vision. And so we got him to perform a task, and just listen out for the call to action. So just listen to what's going on.
Friday the 23rd of check-in.
It doesn't say what time the check-in is there, or have I missed that?
Duration.
What do you mean by
2
what
hours. Check-in.
Oh, it's got here check-in.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, I guess?
Mm-hmm.
Is it telling me I've got to check in, or what time check-in opens,
Mm-hmm.
or I can check in now
Mm-hmm.
to do it? It doesn't say, it doesn't tell me that it's a link.
So what you heard there was the gentleman we'd said, how would you, I think we'd said something cryptic, like how would you prepare for your upcoming flight? He knew he needed to get a boarding pass. He knew he needed to check in. He obviously found the check-in button. Only problem was it didn't say it was a button. And so he's stumbling. And this is a snippet, like this went on for a really long time. Thankfully for us, our developers were in the room at the time. And this was fixed by the end of the day. So this was a really simple thing that it just had to say it was a button so that he knew that he could tap it and it would click through.
Duration.
Sorry.
2 hours.
What's going on there? Go to the next slide. So as part of that, to stop, I guess, these conversations not being had, one thing you can do in Jira, and if any of you use Jira, is you can customize how you build out, what are the requirements of a story to be built out. So I think it's basic, it says the background and that's it. But what we did, we turned it to say, we need background, here are some business rules that you need to be mindful of, and here's the acceptance criteria. And so then when we bring in the acceptance criteria, it brings in that bare minimum that we talked about, but things like the voiceover to announce, we specify exactly what it has to announce. And so one thing that I do as a designer is, so this is a screen of Sketch, and so when designing certain screens, what I'll often do is I'll actually copy and paste the acceptance criteria next to my artboard, and that way there should be no excuses. My designs should 100% follow the accessibility guidelines and the actual story criteria. And so in this screen here, you can see this is Colour Contrast Analyzer, which is an application that Vision Australia have developed. It's a little bit clunky, I will warn you on that. But basically you can just use an eyedropper and it tells you if it meets your the colour contrast requirements. And so depending on, you know, what that text is and what you're saying that you're going to hit, it will tell you if you're a pass or fail. So do test with a wide range of user types. So as I mentioned, we did some usability testing during this project, and we made sure that we were testing with people with specific needs. So what I will say is it can be really difficult if you're, is there many designers in the room? Yeah, cool. So it can be really difficult if you're organising usability testing to try and organise people with specific needs. And so, and it gets like uncomfortably specific. So we said, oh, we want 2 people with a vision impairment, 2 people with physical impairments, and 1 with a cognitive impairment. And so they're difficult questions to screen, especially vision. So when you say, I want someone with low vision, sometimes we were getting in someone that had short-sightedness, that had glasses. They probably didn't even use the dynamic text on their phone. And so what we had to end up doing was getting super, super specific about our accessibility requirements when it came to that. And in the end, we actually just went to the expert. So shameless plug to Utopia, once again, Adam's in the corner. They're fantastic. So they, whilst it's not core to your business, is it? It's becoming. Yeah.
Definitely core to the business.
Yeah, so like accessibility is front and center what they do, and they have people that they draw upon that can come and test your products that have those specific needs. And you know that when you're working with Utopia, they have the need. So you're not going to get somebody that goes, oh, well, yeah, I had short-sightedness, but I got my corneas lasered and now I'm fine. And you're kind of like, it's not really a disability. It's really awkward. So one thing that we did notice too for us is a bit of an aha moment is when we were testing with people was how they actually use their phone and what gestures they use. So we thought we knew, and we thought it was like a drag, which is that first screen here, that screen over there. But what they actually do, and this may not surprise some of you, but it surprised us, was actually just swipe. They swipe left and they swipe right. And every now and again they'll do a few finger scroll, but they just kind of flick through the phone like this, which makes sense. And when you know that that's how they're using the phone, you can then design your voice assist to make sure that things really, really work for them. So as a designer, don't shy away from challenging brand guidelines. So as designers, you often get handed corporate style guides and brand guidelines that often, which I don't mean to be, don't take this the wrong way, but it can be done by designers who are designed for print, who should think about colour contrast, but don't. So we often get colour contrast where if you look at the befores, the colour contrast just isn't there. So if you've, there's a lot of people that have colour blindness in Australia. So I think it's, Adam, I'm sure you're going to know the numbers on this better than I am. I think it's, oh God, it's like 1 in 8 men, and then 1 in 0.4 females. I think. I normally have notes up. Anyway, it's about that. It's quite a lot of people with colour blindness. So that's where your colour contrast comes into play really importantly. So one thing that we've gone and done is we've gone and we've either chosen secondary colours in their palette, or we've gone and just upped that colour ever so slightly so that the contrast actually makes a bare minimum. And even here and there, I guess the not-for-profit one, it's probably not where we want it to be, but it was better than what it was. So always kind of fight for that. I know that one company that's really doing an amazing job with this is Medibank. They actually changed their corporate colours because the blue and the red was a big enough contrast. So their UX team fought for that, and they changed their whole corporate brand that had been around forever. So that's relatively recent. And then I guess the other thing when it comes to brand guidelines, again, a lot of companies, their fonts will be custom fonts. They won't be web fonts. So they'll be paid. Sometimes they're created especially for that company. And so there can be issues that come along with that when it comes to putting them into mobile apps. So this font here is called Montserrat, that custom font on the side. The top is how it renders in Sketch, and the bottom is how it renders in Xcode, which is the iOS coding software. And so that's a pretty considerable change. And so that meant sitting down with a developer for a huge amount of time and changing the fonts to make sure that it actually reflected how the design is intended the whole way through. So one thing I would suggest is to, wherever you can, use a system font. So it's not impossible to use custom fonts in mobile apps. You can do it. It's easy enough. Some things I've noticed in my time that do not do. So needless to say, do not make that custom font an image so that it displays, because that is not readable. Like, oh. Yeah, it's been done. And you're just like, what the hell? Especially in the tab menus. Try not to put custom fonts there. Yeah, use system fonts wherever you can, and do an accent here and there of a custom font. But basically system fonts, they're better for readability, they're optimized for smaller screens, and they're tried and tested, and they work really well for dynamic text sizing where custom fonts haven't been tested as much. So again, do you think of your accessibility on a screen level? So this may be something that some people would challenge, but kind of draw yourself up from that component level wherever you can. So I'm going to just show you an example here. So this is for Virgin Australia, as you can see. So we worked with them over 12 months ago now, and to design this screen. So basically what this screen is showing you is that there's a delay in your flight, which I'm sure for most people brings an element of frustration and anxiety and annoyance as soon as you see it. So imagine hearing this.
4 p.m., 5:25 p.m., 5 p.m., 6:25 p.m., Melbourne, Tullamarine, Sydney.
So what that said at the start was Virgin Australia VA 859 is delayed, and then it said 4 p.m., 5 p.m., Melbourne, Tullamarine, 5:25 p.m., 6:25 p.m., Sydney. Now, I don't know about you, but if that was your only way of working out your flight's delayed and what time your new flight time is, how anxious would you be and how stressed would you be? So again, this was caught by QAs and they were like, is this all right? And I was like, no, that is terrible. And so I'm just going to go to the next slide. This is what we did with a bit of tweaking. It did take a little bit of extra effort just changing groups, but this is what it changed to.
Flight from Melbourne, Tullamarine to Sydney, scheduled to depart at 4 p.m. and arrive at 5:25 p.m., will now depart at 5 p.m. and estimated arrival will be at 6:25 p.m.
So just by changing the grouping on that, all of a sudden it makes sense. And so that for us was you're doing the bare minimum, everything had been labelled, it was out of the box accessibility, but it was still shit, really. And so what we then went and did was just tweaked it a little bit so that it actually made sense and meaningful to the
Arrive
person.
at 5:25.
We don't need to harp on that. So one thing I would also say is don't let accessibility training slip within your team. So if you aren't in a position where you manage a team, or if you're kind of reporting into someone, fight to go to things like Alley Camp, Alley Bites. Alley Bites, I'm pretty sure you can just go to yourself. But yeah, fight to go to Alley Camp, fight to go to some conferences if you can overseas and see these things. So at Transpire, we send our developers to WWDC and Google I/O every year, and we just had someone come back today. And they always have the latest on accessibility. So one thing that we were like, oh yeah, we're really across all the gestures, but then our head of development went there last year and he's like, actually, we're just skimming the ice. Like there's so many more gestures and so much more that we could be doing for people with these few things. So some things that I would do at a basic level. So if you can't get to a conference, if you don't get, training in-house, check out the Apple recordings of their tech talks from the WWDC. They're super, super insightful. Get across their Android guidelines. Do your best you can with the WCAG guidelines. I know they're a nightmare. And then there's a website which Transpire co-manages, which is called Apps for All. And it's basically for anyone that works in a delivery team to be able to get across what they need to be doing as part of their role. And so, yeah, gestures are everything. And I guess one thing I would do too is, to get across the accessibility on your phone is turn it on. One thing you do before you turn it on is set your shortcut, because I can tell you if you don't set your shortcut, you will have great empathy for people that rely on that technology, but you will also have some severe anxiety by the time that you work out how to turn it off. So if you've got an iPhone X, it's just 3 times on the side there, and you'll work out that it's 3 because otherwise you'll bring up your Apple Wallet. So yeah, get across all of that. Yeah, constantly be iterating and just, looking for information. I guess one thing also to be, accessibility, if you're lucky enough to have accessibility front and center in your organization like Transpire, do disagree and discuss, or discuss and disagree. So one of our developers who just got back from WWDC today, he and I were working on Dreamlab, and we're sitting in the kitchen and we're having an argument about what's considered decorative elements. And so something that's decorative doesn't necessarily be an out. So images, for example, may have a bit of an alt tag to them, or they may not. So I don't think that image, that center image, has text on it in this application. But what doesn't have text on it either is the Vodafone Foundation logo, the Australian flag, but the Garvan Institute does. And so I was arguing with him and being like, well, hang on a minute. Vodafone Foundation is a co-founder of this application. And if you haven't got it, download it. It's amazing. It crunches algorithms and helps speed up the research of cancer. So really good app. Use it on your background, and it's really good. We've got videos on our website. I'm not doing it any justice. But basically, my thing was you need to draw a relationship between Dreamlab and the Vodafone Foundation, because there's a partnership going on there. Secondly, you can support projects in this application that are from the UK. And so if you're not seeing the flag, how do you know you've got an Australian project or a UK project? And then I was kind of like, and if you aren't announcing the other two, why the hell are you announcing Garvan Institute? Because, like, you don't, who cares? Anyway, we were going back and forth, round and round and round, getting quite heated. I was getting quite pissed off. So was he. Our head of development came in for lunch, and so did Amir Ansari, our head of UX, and they started weighing in on it, and we're going back and forth. And in the end, I just was like, look, whatever. Like, if you want to follow the Apple guidelines down to the T, I'm saying this is going to be better than what the Apple guidelines are saying. Because my argument was, if you're a low vision user, you can see something's there, but you may not know what it is. So it's no effort for you to let it be announced. Like, I don't think you're going to piss anyone off. And he was like, well, no, that's not what Apple says. So in the end, we let him win. And not that it's about winning and losing, but I was pissed off. But it is one of those things where what was really good about it was it showed how passionate we both were, and it allowed us to have a really rigorous conversation about what's important to users, and it kind of tested us both on where we actually stood with our knowledge of accessibility. So just to kind of start to close out, Apps for All is a really good website, as I said. Transpire owns it, which is a bit of a disclaimer there. The colour contrast tools for designers. So there's colour contrast analyzer that's free from Vision Australia. I think you have to fill out a form, which I think is a little clunky, but persevere. And then there's Funkify, which is a Chrome extension. So that will just run through. There's also another Chrome extension if you're wanting to know the touch states of your website. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but Google accessibility in Chrome plugins, or I'll have a quick look on my website, my computer, and if you're interested, come and see me. There's also another one which I use, which is here, called Contrast, I think it's called. You buy that for about $20 through the Apple App Store, and that's really good because it just kind of tells you if you're a pass or fail, and the eyedropper on that works really well. And then get across the platform guidelines. So Google and Apple both design accessibly most of the time. There's only been, I think, once we've found that Google has broken their own rules, which we promptly told them. But yeah, if you're following their guidelines, you're going to be designing best practice for mobile anyway. And then if you're designing for Android, there's the Accessibility Scanner app, which basically takes a snapshot of your app and tells you ticks and crosses and tells you where you're not meeting par. So yeah, and final takeaway. So I guess the whole point of this is start somewhere. And this, again, this isn't, I know this is a web meetup and this is very mobile centric and native design centric, but start somewhere when it comes to the work that you're doing. So accessibility or building an accessible product is a bit of an evolution. So you think you've got it nailed and you run into someone and they're like, you're not meeting my needs. And that's okay. It's okay to get it wrong. go with a good, better, best. So at least you can say, look, we're trying, we'll do what we can. Thank you for sharing and getting that information to us. Showcase the impact that accessibility has. So I don't think I actually said this throughout the talk, but one thing, if you are doing accessibility, usability testing with your clients, or you're doing user testing, get as many different people from your project team in that testing. There's so much to be said about developers, QAs, product owners, clients, sitting and watching someone use the thing that you've designed. Doesn't matter if it's accessibility testing or usability testing. They will be like so converted into the power of what good design is for everyone and what inclusive design is once they've watched the impact that has on people. Don't underestimate the benefits of good grouping. As you saw before, you can have a clusterfuck of not knowing when your delayed flight is, or you can actually know when your flight is. Glad there's someone laughing at my swearing. And yeah, keep up the conversation. And then just to close out, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Thanks.